and he's going to be loud as fuck, and that's really cool.
The way everyone told me about their Dylan favorites gave me an impression that this man and his music really meant something to them. And with that in mind, I asked them about times of their life where Dylan was particularly influential.
Well, the biggest one is when I went to graduate school in 1974 at the University of Illinois, moving from Colorado to Champaign, Illinois, moving from a world where I was primarily a journalist and primarily lived on the streets in one way or another to moving to an academic context. I absolutely could not stand it for my first year there. I thought that, you know, I'd been sentenced to, I don't know, the 6.5 circle of Dante's Hell or something. And at that time, two things happened. As I encountered the writing of Ralph Ellison and James Baldwin in a seminar in graduate school, and I cross-referenced particularly Ellison's notion of the blues and Baldwin's notion of honesty with Highway 61 Revisited particularly. And Highway 61 gave me a point of reference for processing my own emotions and my own resistances, and to ask the question of what is it that I'm running away from here? What is it really that I'm not liking? And Highway 61 just kept my head above water for 6 months or so. So more than anything else, that's the moment where Dylan was defining for me. More than that, I've just used Dylan as a touchstone, as a challenge, and as a reminder that there's a bigger game than the institutional game, than the professional game that, externally at least, my life has been organized around.
So when I was in Vietnam, other than like if we ever heard like a Rolling Stone, there wasn't new current Dylan music out then that spoke to us. Some guys still played Blowing in the Wind, you know, on their lead guitars, you know. Some guys loved Masters of War. I mean, we would bring out anything that could be relevant to our cause, even though he had written them necessarily about Vietnam per se. But curiously for me, when I got back home, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. You know, I was in law school when I got drafted. Didn't want to go back to law school. Wanted to go back to school because I wanted to hang out on campus and sort of let my freak flag fly, you know. And so I went to graduate school, but I got a master's in English. And Dylan was there for me. All of a sudden, it was like this whole... And there was a time in my life, I got out of the Army in late 71. I started graduate school in the fall of 72. From the fall of 72, I'd say, until the end of the summer of 74, I listened to Bob Dylan every day. Sometimes multiple albums, you know, no iPods then. I had tapes, I had albums, I had a great stereo system that I got when I was in Vietnam. And Dylan sort of became like my mentor.
And unbelievable to me was Dylan was ahead of the times. He actually predicted the future. I don't know if he knew he was doing that exactly. I think he was talking more about the past, but he predicted the future, and in my life, he predicted it pretty well. So, I mean, in front of me, I have Masters of War, and when I got to Vietnam, the sergeant ahead of me, I eventually became a sergeant myself, but there was an E6 from Lake Mills, who I was actually a college graduate, and he wasn't, but he'd gone through NCO school, so he outranked me. He had more power than I did, and he played a guitar, of all things. And he would open mic, you know, there was no mic, but if we were in a place where it was safe, and there was, his guitar was kept safely in a supply area, so you had to be able to get to it. He didn't have it with him at all times, and probably played it 10 times while I was there. But I had to always get Dylan, and he liked Dylan because he could sing as well as Dylan could sing, you know, sort of. You know, it was more inflection and it was more power and it was more... But coming out of an E6, Dylan songs was impressively potent. So it was really kind of... Through this guy, it was really absorbed in my soul even more. Because now I'm in Vietnam. And you got, come you Masters of War, you that build the big guns, you that build the death planes, you that build all the bombs, you that hide behind walls, you that hide behind desks. I just want you to know I can see through your masks. You that never done nothing but build to destroy. You play with my world like it's your little toy. If you take a soldier and you ask him what does it feel like, it feels like you're a puppet. That's the toy you are. You just go where they tell you to go. You know, so all that has a lyric to his song, but the song comes alive. In other words, you live out his song, whether he knew it or not. And
yeah, like it was sort of the soundtrack to me sorting out how I thought about being in the military, you know, electively. I mean, admittedly, I elected to join the military. You know, that's how it works. But finding myself in a situation where it wasn't what I wound up. It didn't wind up being what I thought it was going to be, and sort of sifting through that and thinking about, you know, okay, I'm seeing things that don't fit with the perspective that I've been given. And so how do I negotiate what I think about that now? And having a soundtrack to that sort of thought process and that sorting through of the situation helped, you know, and Dylan was a big part of that soundtrack.
He came to New York when he was 19. I came to college when I was 19. I'm relating him a lot to my life and my journey through, like, to figure out me. I correlate with Dylan learning about Dylan. And I think one of the reasons Song to Woody is my favorite songs is because he was singing to his mentor, his idol, who he wanted to be, not who he wanted to be, who he wanted to emulate, and who he wanted to follow in the footsteps of. And I think, and I'm not singing to Bob Dylan, but I'm listening to him and how he connected to Woody Guthrie, so I use him as kind of like a model of like which directions I can go.
While there seems to be a lot of personal meaning to Dylan, I wanted to know more about what impact Dylan has had on the music world.
That's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about that, and I think the answer is really not a hell of a lot.
All right.
That Dylan's great albums are so quirky that anybody who's trying to make one is nuts. And there was a whole series of good singers and songwriters who were marketed as the next Dylan. Donovan Leitch, Scottish songwriter, one of the earliest of them. Bruce Springsteen, probably the most notorious of them. I have a cartoon out on my the board outside my office, which says Mr. Guthrie's class, and it shows Dylan sitting in classroom where Woody Guthrie is teaching, and Springsteen's copying off of Dylan's test, and John Cougar's Mellencamp is in the background looking stranded. I think it's a nice representation of what happens. What Dylan teaches people, musicians who are paying attention, is don't try to be Dylan, try to be yourself. Sure. And in those terms, I guess that I was being probably a little literal when I answered the question before. In terms of his influence on the music scene, it's setting a standard for honesty and following your own path that any number of great artists have followed, and that Dylan has been a piece of that. He was not the only piece of that. John Lennon was doing something similar at the same time. Stevie Wonder, most certainly. Aretha Franklin, most certainly. So he's a part of a broader movement to take popular music away from being radio fodder and into being, Dylan would reject the term, but what the hell, art. Man is an artist, like it or not. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's more for you to answer than me. But what I do know is that when I take Dylan to students today, there's a recognition of a lot of what he's saying. It inevitably means something different in a time, you know, post-hip-hop, postmodern in a conscious way. So much has changed. But yeah, I think that Dylan addresses a lot of issues which are never going away. And I think that in some ways right now, post-economic collapse of 2007, 2008, students are much less likely to buy the hype, to buy the glitter, that everything's okay. A whole lot more people are sending their postcards from Desolation Row right now, And all along the way, Dylan has been talking about that, whereas you're not going to hear so much of that on American Idol.